The mysterious death of Henry I. Hello, history detectives. Welcome back to another episode of Royal Death Investigations, where we dig deep into the mysterious deaths of medieval monarchs. I'm your host, and today we're traveling back nearly 900 years to uncover the truth behind one of the most intriguing royal deaths in English history, the death of King Henry I. If you're new here, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell, because we've got plenty more royal mysteries coming your way. The king who should never have been. Picture this. It's the year 1100, and England is about to get a king that nobody saw coming. Henry, born in July 1068, was the fourth son of the legendary William the Conqueror. In medieval times, being the fourth son was like being dealt the worst hand in poker. You weren't supposed to inherit anything, let alone a kingdom. Yet here we are, about to tell the story of how this unlikely prince became one of England's most successful rulers, only to meet his end in the most bizarre way imaginable. Henry earned the nickname Beauclerc, which means fine scholar or good clerk, and here's why that's remarkable. In an age when even kings couldn't read or write, Henry was a walking, talking encyclopedia. His father, William the Conqueror, couldn't read. His brothers? Illiterate. But Henry? This guy was devouring books like they were going out of style. In a world where knowledge was power, Henry had just won the lottery. But being smart doesn't automatically make you king. When his brother, William Rufus, died in a suspicious hunting accident in the New Forest in August 1100, Henry moved faster than a medieval Formula One driver. While his older brother Robert was off playing Crusader in the Holy Land, Henry sprinted to Winchester, grabbed the royal treasury, and had himself crowned king within 3 days. Now, Robert wasn't too happy about this when he eventually made it back from his crusade. For 6 years, England lived under the constant threat of invasion, as Robert tried to claim what he believed was rightfully his. But Henry wasn't just going to sit around waiting for trouble to find him. In 1106, he took the fight to Robert's doorstep, invading Normandy and facing his brother at the Battle of Tinchebrai. The battle was decisive. His older brother Robert was captured, and Henry's reign was secure. But here's where it gets dark. Even by medieval standards, Henry didn't just defeat his brother, he imprisoned him for the rest of his life. 28 years, Robert languished in various English castles until his death. That's nearly 3 decades of captivity. If you visit Gloucester Cathedral today, you can still see Robert's beautiful tomb, a silent testament to a duke who traded his freedom for his brother's crown. The king himself. So what was Henry like as a person? Contemporary chroniclers paint a picture of a man who was impossible to ignore. He was built like a medieval bodybuilder, muscular, imposing, with thick black hair that probably made him stand out in any room. They described him as energetic, which in medieval terms usually meant he was always doing something: hunting, fighting, governing, or, as we'll discover, eating things he probably shouldn't have. But here's the fascinating contradiction. This physically imposing, intellectually gifted king lived in constant fear. Henry suffered from what we might today recognize as paranoia about assassination. In an age where poisoning was the political tool of choice and brothers imprisoned brothers, perhaps his fear wasn't entirely irrational. He trusted no one completely, and this anxiety would follow him throughout his 35-year reign. Henry married Matilda, a Scottish princess, in a move that was pure political genius. This marriage linked him to the old Anglo-Saxon line of Wessex kings, giving his Norman rule a legitimacy that money couldn't buy. It was like getting a medieval seal of approval from the very people his father had conquered. But if Henry had one weakness, it was his romantic life. The man had more illegitimate children than a medieval soap opera. Historians count at least 20 acknowledged bastards. In an age where having lots of children was considered insurance for your dynasty, Henry seemed to have all his bases covered. Except for one crucial problem: he had only one legitimate son, and that son's story is one of the most heartbreaking in medieval history. The White Ship Disaster, a father's nightmare. November 25, 1120. Remember this date, because it changed the course of English history forever. Henry and his court were in Harfleur, preparing to return to England after a successful campaign in Normandy. The king was in good spirits, everything was going according to plan. Then fate walked up and introduced itself in the form of Thomas Fitzstephen. Fitzstephen was the captain of a vessel called the Blanche Neuf, the White Ship. This wasn't just any ship. It was the same vessel whose previous captain had carried William the Conqueror across the English Channel for the Norman conquest. Fitzstephen approached Henry with what seemed like a reasonable request. let him carry the king's son back to England in this historically significant ship. Henry had already made his own travel arrangements, but he agreed to let his son and heir, also named William, take the White Ship, along with about 300 members of the royal court, the cream of Norman nobility, all young, all vital to the future of the kingdom. Here's where the story takes a turn that feels almost mythical in its tragedy. The White Ship was supposedly the fastest vessel in the fleet, so they decided to leave later and catch up with the king's ship. While they waited, the crew and passengers did what medieval people did when they had time to kill. They drank, and drank, and drank some more. Picture the scene. The most important young people in the kingdom, drunk on wine, laughing and singing as they prepared to set sail on a cold November night. The crew was so intoxicated that they could barely stand, let alone navigate. But they set sail anyway, confident in their ship's speed and their own abilities. What happened next was swift and catastrophic. The White Ship struck a submerged rock on the port side, a rock that any sober navigator would have easily avoided. The impact was so severe that the ship immediately began to capsize. In the icy waters of the English Channel, on a November night, survival time was measured in minutes, not hours. Of the approximately 300 people aboard, only 2 survived. One was a nobleman who initially managed to cling to the wreckage, but eventually succumbed to the cold and drowned. The other was a butcher from Rouen named Berold, and his survival was nothing short of miraculous. Berold survived because he was wearing a sheepskin coat, essentially medieval winter gear that provided just enough insulation to keep him alive through the longest night of his life. He clung to debris in the freezing water, watching everyone he knew disappear into the darkness, listening to their cries fade away, until there was only silence and the sound of waves. When rescue came the next morning, Berold was the sole witness to one of the greatest disasters in medieval history. Henry's only legitimate son was dead. The entire next generation of Norman nobility was gone. In one night, the future of England had been rewritten. Breaking the news to a king. The most poignant part of this entire story. How do you tell a king that his son is dead? How do you deliver news that will destroy a father and destabilize a kingdom? The courtiers who had stayed behind faced an impossible task. No one had the courage to walk up to the most powerful man in England and destroy his world. So they found a child. A young boy whose obvious grief would convey the message without words. When Henry saw this weeping child, he understood immediately what had happened. The chroniclers tell us that Henry never smiled again. Think about that for a moment. Here was a man who had everything: power, wealth, respect, military victories, and in one night, it all became meaningless. The king who had spent 35 years building a dynasty, suddenly had no dynasty to build. Henry became obsessed with succession. He brought his daughter Matilda back to England and forced the nobles to swear allegiance to her, something almost unprecedented in medieval Europe. A woman ruler? The idea was so radical it would eventually tear the kingdom apart in a civil war known as the Anarchy. Matilda married Geoffrey Plantagenet, yes, that's where that famous royal name comes from, and they had 3 sons, Henry, Geoffrey, and William. The old king found some comfort in his grandsons, but he never forgot what he had lost in the White Ship. Fast forward 15 years. Henry is now 67 years old, ancient by medieval standards, when most people were lucky to see 40. Despite his age, he's still active, still engaged in ruling his kingdom. He's been out hunting in the forests of Normandy, probably feeling pretty good about life. His daughter's sons are growing up strong and smart. The kingdom is stable. Everything seems to be going well. Then he makes a decision that will cost him his life. After the hunt, Henry sits down to what he thinks will be a pleasant meal. On the menu? Lampreys. Now, if you've never seen a lamprey, count yourself lucky. These creatures look like something from a horror movie. Eel-like fish with circular, sucker mouths full of rows of sharp teeth. They attach themselves to other fish and literally suck the life out of them. Appetizing, right? But here's the thing. Henry absolutely loved these disgusting creatures. He was obsessed with them. Think of your favorite food, the one thing you could eat every day and never get tired of. That's what lampreys were to Henry. Unfortunately, they didn't love him back. His physicians, the medieval equivalent of doctors, had repeatedly warned him about eating lampreys. "Your Majesty," they probably said, "these things make you sick every single time. Maybe try some nice roasted chicken instead." But Henry was the king, and kings don't take dietary advice from anyone. So there he sits, 67 years old, tired from hunting, absolutely devouring a meal of lampreys, despite knowing they always made him ill. He's probably thinking, I'm the King of England and Duke of Normandy, I can eat whatever I want. What happened next is where our death investigation really begins. Within hours, possibly even minutes, of finishing his lamprey feast, Henry became violently ill. We're talking about immediate, severe symptoms that had him doubled over in agony. Now his physicians immediately started pointing fingers, essentially saying, don't blame us, we told him not to eat those things. But as death investigators, we need to look at the evidence more carefully. The chroniclers give us some crucial details. Matthew Paris wrote that Henry ate voraciously of a lamprey, and, quote, paid no attention to his physicians when they forbade it to him. Henry of Huntingdon adds that the lampreys always disagreed with him, though he was exceedingly fond of them. Here's what we know happened. Henry ate the lampreys, became immediately and severely ill, developed a high fever, and died within hours, or at most a few days. The speed of onset is crucial to our investigation. Let's consider the possibilities. Food poisoning theory. Could the lampreys have been contaminated with salmonella, or another bacterial infection? It's possible. Medieval food safety wasn't exactly up to modern standards. Fish could easily spoil, especially if not properly stored or cooked. However, bacterial food poisoning typically takes several hours to develop symptoms, and the accounts suggest Henry became ill almost immediately. Allergic reaction. Could Henry have developed a severe allergy to lampreys over time? Some people do develop allergies to foods they've eaten safely for years. A severe allergic reaction could explain the rapid onset of symptoms and the quick progression to death. The perforation theory. Here's where modern medical analysis gets interesting. The rapid onset of severe abdominal pain, followed by fever and quick death, sounds remarkably like a perforated ulcer. Think about it. Henry had a history of digestive problems with lampreys. Over the years, this could have led to the development of ulcers in his stomach or duodenum. The stress of a heavy meal could have caused one of these ulcers to perforate, essentially burst open. When an ulcer perforates, stomach acid spills into the abdominal cavity, causing peritonitis, a life-threatening infection. The symptoms match perfectly: sudden, severe pain, followed by fever, and rapid progression to death if untreated. In 1135, there was no treatment for this condition. The poison theory. We can't completely rule out poisoning, despite all sources insisting the lampreys were the natural cause of death. Henry lived in constant fear of assassination, and poison was a common method of medieval murder. However, the fact that multiple sources emphasize his physician's warnings against eating lampreys suggests this wasn't a planned poisoning, but rather a tragic case of a stubborn king ignoring medical advice. A kingdom in crisis. Henry died on December 1, 1135, probably in agony, certainly aware that his death would plunge England into chaos. His body was returned to England for burial at Reading Abbey, which he had founded. There was no embalming, no autopsy. Medieval medicine simply didn't have these capabilities. The political consequences were immediate and devastating. Despite Henry's efforts to secure the succession for his daughter Matilda, his nephew Stephen seized the throne almost immediately. This led to a brutal civil war called the Anarchy that lasted nearly 20 years and saw England torn apart by competing claims to the crown. Matilda eventually invaded England to press her claim, leading to a conflict that saw castles burned, towns destroyed, and the country reduced to what one chronicler called a time when Christ and his saints slept. The civil war only ended when Matilda's son Henry, who would become Henry II, was recognized as Stephen's heir. Henry I's death is a perfect example of how personal choices can change the course of history. If Henry had listened to his doctors, if he had chosen a different meal that December evening, if he had survived even a few more years, the entire history of medieval England might have been different. The White Ship disaster had already dealt a devastating blow to his dynasty. His death from a preventable cause completed the destruction of the Norman succession he had worked so hard to establish. Instead of a smooth transition to his daughter Matilda, England got 2 decades of civil war. It's also a reminder that even kings are mortal, and that sometimes the most powerful people in the world are brought down not by armies or conspiracies, but by their own stubborn refusal to take good advice. Henry I, the scholar king who could read and write when others couldn't, who outmaneuvered his brothers and built a stable kingdom, was ultimately defeated by his love of a disgusting fish. And that's the story of Henry I's mysterious death, solved by medieval CSI. What do you think? Was it really just a case of royal stubbornness, or could there have been more sinister forces at play? Let me know in the comments below. Don't forget to like this video if you enjoyed our investigation, subscribe for more royal death mysteries, and hit that notification bell so you never miss an episode. Next week, we'll be investigating another suspicious royal death that will make Henry's lamprey feast look like a picnic. Until then, keep questioning history, and remember, sometimes the truth is stranger than fiction, especially when it comes to medieval monarchs. See you in the next episode.